Hello, and welcome to another episode of Around the Verse. I'm Sandy Gardner.
And I'm Chris Roberts.
This week, Jared Huckabee brings us inside looks at two very different ships in February's installment of Ship Shape.
Yeah, that's right. Ships are obviously a huge part of the Star Citizen experience, and we're very excited to use this segment to introduce our first new concept ship for 2018.
Let's check in with Jared now.
Greetings, citizens, and welcome to another episode of the brand new Ship Shape, where we take a quick look at what's in the ship pipeline, who's working on what, bring you interviews with the developers, and sometimes, just sometimes, we get to reveal something brand new coming to Star Citizen that I think you're going to enjoy quite a bit. I'm your host, Content Manager Jared Huckabee. Behind me, you see that ship pipeline I just mentioned. The ever-evolving, continuously expanding network of phases and milestones that each ship or vehicle must reach before they can make their way into your personal hangars or the spaceports of the persistent universe. Whether it's from design to concept, from white box to gray box to final art and flight prep, this is the system we've built up over the course of our development to ensure you the best possible spaceship or vehicle for your Star Citizen experience. On this month's show, we're going to update on a variety of ships that are currently working their way through the pipeline, and then sit down with the team in our Los Angeles studio who are currently working on the Anvil Terrapin, scheduled for release in Alpha 3.1. But before we get to that, we'd like to introduce something that's just beginning its journey through the ship pipeline, our first concept of 2018. Since our project began, we've introduced 114 ships and vehicles and their variants that span a wide array of roles and intentions like combat, transport, exploration, industrial, support, and competition. Now, this variety is an essential component to creating that living, breathing universe that we all aspire to, and a variety of profession-specific ships will be necessary to populate the spaceways. Ships like the Miss Starfarer bring with it the promise of refueling services to the far reaches of the verse, and with a vessel like the Anvil Crucible, a career rescuing disabled ships and helping them in their repair will bring support when folks can't make the long trip home on their own. With these two and many others like them, profession ships will form the backbone of much of Star Citizen's emergent gameplay in 2018 and beyond. But the Starfarer and the Crucible are intermediate to advanced profession ships, right? So what do we do about those of us who are just starting out our journeyman careers? Well, fret not, my friends. Our first ship of 2018 will have you covered, and in more ways than one. So which is it? Refueling or repairing? Well, the fine folks at Aegis Dynamics say, why not both? Let's throw in some rearming to boot. Yes, without further ado, let's sit down with some of the team working in our Manchester studio to bring Star Citizen's first multi-profession starter ship to life with the Aegis Vulcan.
So the Aegis Vulcan is a sort of starting ship for a bunch of professions that we already have in game, but we only sort of have the end game ships for people to use. So if you're interested in refueling or repairing, you've got the Starfarer and the Crucible. So those are pretty big ships to sort of jump in at if you want to go, oh, today I want to do some repairing of ships. You're looking at these huge ships that have substantial crew requirements and time requirements to get. If you jump in at those and find, well, actually I don't like this, then it's a huge time investment waste on that. So the Vulcan is sort of the jack of all trades starter ship for those professions. It does repairing, it does refueling, and it does rearming, which is something we don't have in any ship currently. It's a versatile support ship. It's there to support other ships. It's not great at combat, it's not great at transport, it's not great at racing. It's there for helping out with other ships. So if you're that sort of person that is interested in not the more active combat side, but helping others, then this is a really great entry into that, because it does allow you to help out massively for ships that run out of fuel, ships that have minor damage, ships that run out of ammo, and any of these ships could be stuck out in deep space, and they can call for your help, and you can go out there and give them just enough to get them to where they need to go to. It's sort of like the space AA or AAA for America. You call them up, they give you just enough to get to where you're going, and then you can do your full repairs, rearm, refuel there. So the mechanic for doing the repairing, refueling, rearming is via its drones. So it has 4 drones that are sort of contained within the body of the ship, and then it can launch them out. These drones can do all 3 actions, but they can only do 1 at a time before they have to go back to the mothership to change function, to take on new supplies. So whilst you've got 4 and they can do everything, they can't do it all together, so you can't have 4 out fixing everything at a time. There are only 2 stations to control the drones, so again, it sort of keeps tabs on what it can do. It's a 3-person ship, so you've got 1 person flying and 2 support stations, which would be either controlling the turrets or controlling the drones. So naturally, if you're in a sort of hostile environment, you may not want to have everybody controlling the drones and leaving yourself defenseless. So you sort of got to trade off your defensive capabilities with your support capabilities. So we see probably 2 drones at a time going out at any one time, doing 1 or 2 of those 3 features. And the extra 2 are just there for if you want to quickly change what you're doing. They're all stocked in the ship, ready to go. You can send them out. Naturally, the drones will either stay where you've left them or continue on an AI behavior. Or if you're out for an extended duration of time, you're probably going to start losing these drones. They might get damaged, you might be careless flying them around. If you're trying to repair a ship, you might actually bang into it and destroy the drone. So we felt that if you only had 2 and you can only use 2 at a time, and 1 gets destroyed, that's quite a harsh penalty. You sort of lost 50% of your ability to do anything off the bat. So we've got those extra 2 as sort of redundancies and allows you to just stay out that bit longer. There's crew quarters in there, so it's not a I've got a mission to go do this item, I've got to go there, come back, because I can't survive out in space. You've got your crew beds, you've got basic living quarters, basic accommodation. So we see people spending significant amounts of time out on these missions, using up their drones, using up their supplies. There's a very small cargo hold to keep supplies in there, which sort of feeds into the drones. If you're carting ammo around, you're not physically carrying ammo boxes to it, they go into the drones do it. There's an extended fuel tank under the body of the ship, which is where the fuel that you're piping to these ships come from, and then the drones themselves do the repair, much like we have in the PU at the moment with the little drones on the cryastro stations where you land and they come out and repair you. It's very similar style to that. So there's a small crew on this ship, 3 people, pilot, and then 2 support staff basically. And they can basically either control the guns or the drones basically. So I guess, I don't know if you'll have to fight it out over who does what, or if they can, both, I guess, you've got 2 drones on either side of the ship. So I guess possibly one guy could do 2 on one side, 2 on another, and send them off, do their thing. So the ship is, the way it works is, entry is from the rear of the ship. So, you've got a big tailgate that sort of opens up, and that gives you access to the cargo area. And I think it's 12 SCUs that it can hold. And then there's a small elevator that takes you up. It's almost like a mezzanine, and then it takes you to the living quarters, some basic habitation at the rear of the craft. So a couple of beds, the obligatory toilet and shower, food station, a little table. It's very much. It's in the, it's that same sort of style as, it's basically the industrial Aegis, essentially. And so that feeds through the whole of the ship. So there's a lot of, we've taken a lot of what the art team have done when they've been making the Reclaimer and sort of pulled that in and used that, and used it as sort of, not a template, but just helped define the style of the interior. There's 3 liveries, basically, that we've done for the ship. One's more military based, that's one we sort of focused on initially, just to get the ship through the pipeline. And then after that, it was then we had a little, we had more time to then sort of focus on the alternatives. Sometimes the ships sort of fight you back.
and you have to, you know, sometimes you just have to, you know, you're like up to 80 iterations before you hit on the shape, before you go to 3D. That does sound a lot, and sometimes that's just the way it is. So on this one, it was a pretty strong start, and like I said, it is the sort of stylistically the baby Reclaimer, and just by its very nature of what it does, the functionality that needs to be in the ship. I won't say it designs itself, but you know, it's close to it. You know, there's a logical route that you want to take, and so. But even still, even though you know it's a relatively small ship, there's still a lot of interest in the spaces. But yeah, I like it. I think it's got a good feel. So I'm looking forward to when this one gets built.
This gives you that taste of those careers and see whether you actually enjoy doing it, whether you feel it's got a sort of an in-game money-making opportunity enough that you want to do it full-term or full-time as a procession. It's not for everyone, but lots of people just love that support gameplay, and this is really a ship for that.
Refueling, repairing, and rearming. And with a collection of skins to do so in style, the Aegis Vulcan is our first concept addition to Star Citizen for 2018 and will be available to all backers for an extended pledge period that begins on February 22nd and runs through the remainder of March. So every backer will have a chance to attain what could be Star Citizen's most versatile starter ship yet. And well, I mean, I can tell you I'm going to be picking up mine to be certain. Now, if only Vulcan owners could have a special salute to greet others with. This'll work. Now, farther along than the Vulcan, we have a number of ships working their way through the pipeline on their journey to release into the Star Citizen universe. To get us started this month, the Constellation Phoenix, which has now entered gray box phase at the high poly modeling stage, is currently having its exterior and interior fleshed out, the geo refined, tweaks made to the lighting, and the incorporation of all the most important features like fish tanks, wall screens, a bar area, and of course, the hot tub. While the Anvil Hurricane is close to wrapping up gray box on the art side and will soon be passed over to the tech design team for their work on the tech setup. Also in gray box is the Aegis Hammerhead, where progress continues on the interior with a focus on the nose and the main corridor layout utilizing Idris parts. Now, it's not all just Idris hand-me-downs for this ship. There are new modular pieces bespoke to the Hammerhead that are being built as part of this process, such as the specialized lifts and the signature turrets specific to this design that must be included. In rework news, the Consolidated Outland Mustang update is also in gray box with the art team, while the tech design team is preparing for another white box review. And moving ahead to final art, we find the Avenger rework, where a new EMP room for the Warlock has been through several revisions and is close to completion, as is the new landing gear that had to get scaled up because, well, the ship hull got scaled up as well, so you know how that does. Finally, in the flight prep phase, we have 4 ships that are currently nearing the finish line for their intended release in the upcoming Alpha 3.1. The Miss Grazer, the Aegis Reclaimer, the Tumbril Cyclone, and of course, the Anvil Terrapin. For the ship animation team, each vehicle presents its own variety of unique challenges. For instance, the Aegis Reclaimer has a very sophisticated landing and VTOL system, requiring unique rigging and technical setup, some of which you may have seen on this week's Calling All Devs and a sneak peek offered by our own Matthew Intrieri. The audio team has been supporting the SFX requirements for ships like the Miss Grazer and the Tumbril Cyclone, for those including thrusters, mechanical elements, ambience, and the UI, while the Anvil Terrapin is the very first ship of the year to go through the VFX treatment, working on effects like thrusters, damage, and a death mask that's using some new debris assets that have never actually been seen before. All of these teams from around the world are working to bring these 4 ships across the finish line in time for our intended Q1 release of Alpha 3.1. But before we let you go, we're going to check in with some of the team currently working in our Los Angeles studio on the little turtle that could, the Anvil Terrapin.
The Anvil Terrapin is your first step into the exploration specialization of ships, of going out into the unknown and surviving it. The Terrapin is built to be very, very durable over most other things. It's not really for combat, it's not for cargo. It's for finding things, for exploring, seeing what's out there, and living to tell about it. As that first leg into exploration, the Terrapin is a relatively modest ship. It's not too imposing, which I actually consider one of its strengths. It gets to go into uncharted territory, and if it comes across someone else who's also exploring, or he comes across aliens or natives, it is not this imposing war ship. It's there to see what's there to find. It's got a scanner array and it's got heavy armor, but aside from that, it doesn't really have any offensive focus. So if someone sees you, they know that you're not here to pick a fight. In the current iteration of the flight system, everything is kind of the same in that the thrusters that you have, they have different uses, and so we'll allow this thruster to contribute a certain amount of thrust and not that thruster because they're specified for different uses, but the reason that they're specified for different uses is still being implemented. And part of that is the heat factor, which we don't currently take into account with our thrusters. We have it in a lot of our other systems, but we're still getting everything built out. And when thrusters overheat, they'll start to have error, and they'll start to have give you less thrust than you expected, or give some of that thrust in directions that weren't intended. And so that's going to make your thruster systems a lot less reliable once they start to overheat. Your maneuvering thrusters are designed for instantaneous thrust, high output, immediate action, and then hopefully, because you're in space, not needing to follow it up. Maybe follow it up with a different action on some different set of thrusters that'll allow you to counteract that motion or augment it into some other more advanced maneuver. That's fine in space, because you get to carry that momentum. When you're in atmosphere, when you're under the influence of gravity, you have a constant force to negate in order to stay up in the air. And maneuvering thrusters aren't meant to be able to take that kind of load, not indefinitely. For a couple seconds is fine, but in order to be able to really just hover in the air, you want to have VTOLs. You want to have sustained thrusters, or sustained thrusters. So the Terrapin will be able to point its mains down and be able to stay up indefinitely and avoid overheating, as long as you don't do anything too crazy.
So my job on the Terrapin was building out the interior, which was pretty difficult considering that a lot of the concept art we had for it had to be changed to match the new Anvil style guide. So I got to really hone in on what Anvil interiors look like. It's the first major actual walkable Anvil interior that we have. The original didn't really have a distinct look. A lot of manufacturers, if you look at Origin, they got a lot of big bubbly shapes that kind of are reminiscent of Soviet aircraft. The Anvil has a lot of exterior shapes that are very recognizable. Everyone knows that Anvil dome and the big angular shapes. So when we wanted to go to the interior, we were looking a lot at the angles, and we came up with the idea of this hexagon pattern like that. And then you have the floor plane, which is lifted up inside of that. So a lot of the stuff that makes Anvil interiors unique and exteriors is 30-degree angles everywhere, hexagons everywhere. It's made to look kind of like Star Wars meets Aliens. Some of the things I had to create for the Anvil interior were component boxes. I had to design out the dashboard, which was really fun because Anvil has a lot of analog controls. It's still a little bit more sleek than Drake, but it feels very bulky and militaristic. I'm really proud of that joystick that I made. It's actually designed off of a Warthog joystick. Inside the Terrapin, you got the scanner array, the chair that rotates, the support chair, I did a lot of the initial work on it, but it really came together when Elwin got his hands on it and kind of took it the extra couple steps. It's a really cool chair. We had to completely redesign the control panel that comes down, because originally it was just in front of you and it'd fold up, but we couldn't get it to look right. So we ended up having it come down over you and act kind of also as like almost a seatbelt.
When I first get my hands on the Terrapin, it's just come hot off like the artist plate, right? So what I do is I look at the damage plan for it and I try and figure out where it needs to break apart and how I need to set it up and make sure it works. So for the Terrapin in particular, when I was looking at the damage plan, I realized that it has a pretty unified shape, so I had to look for a lot of dangly bits to kind of break off. Luckily, it has the 4 thrusters, it has some panels, control consoles, the door can break apart, the nose tears apart from the body, which rips apart from the tail. In each of those chunks, there's the viz areas, so I need to make sure that when the nose and the tail rip apart, the pieces stay, things disappear. Yeah, and all the damage has its LODs, making sure that every piece that breaks off also decreases in quality as it goes away from the camera. So making sure that the Terrapin, for example, has mounted weapons and those weapons fly off with the correct parts, you know, like just going through all the checks and balances of the ship. Can I walk in and press the button, turn the ship on? Okay, great. Can I walk in, have a seat in the seat? Does the character's hands look okay? Do I have to send it back to animation? You know, I'm just taking a look at the Terrapin and just from the player's standpoint perspective of I plop in game, I walk up to the ship, press the button, door opens, go into the ship, look at the passenger seat, hop in the back, and under the radar dome, there's a player seat. In the front of the ship, there's a seat. So you're just kind of going around and making sure that all the functionalities there that design has put in, making sure all the parts that design has put in are loading in. Just general feature checks and everything. And the Terrapin's looking so far so good. The art's looking really nice on the damage side. It's got lots of nice details under the surface. And the effects are looking good too. Still needs a few tweaks here and there. The overall damage system isn't done yet. We've been implementing, I don't want to say necessarily a new tech, it's the item 2.0 thing everyone's been hearing about for a while, but basically we're converting a lot of items to item 2.0. What that means is basically they existed as one form and now they exist as another form, but a weapon's a weapon's, a thruster's a thruster. But when it comes from the tech art standpoint, when I'm doing the damage setup for the Terrapin, it's got, say, 5 or 6 parts. It's got the body, which is the whole ship, and it's got attachments that load in separately, like the thrusters and the radar dome and the door. All those need to be kind of stitched separately into a UV2 sheet. So I talk with art and I talk with design, I find out what parts are going to be this way and what parts are going to be pulled in that way, and then I go in and I make sure that everything is kind of working together. But so far, art's done a bunch of changes I requested recently, and the model's looking much better from a damage standpoint. Functionality standpoint, still work in progress, but otherwise the Terrapin's looking really good. So the changes I in particular requested for the damage system, since I first get the ship and when I get it, nothing breaks off, right? It's just like, shoot the ship, nothing kind of happens. So the artist doesn't necessarily see what it's going to look like at the end until I've done my initial pass. So I went in, I shot up the Terrapin, and I blew off each part, and I'm like, okay, well, when the thruster leg detaches from the body, what kind of like metal and wires and stuff are sticking out of the hole? Does it look too flush? That was kind of my first thing. It just kind of looked like an empty cavity. And I'm like, hey, could you just add some more stuff here? Because if a modeler adds, say, wires or pipes or tubes, my initial particle pass is going to be like, oh, what cool damage stuff did the guy add? Did he add wires? Add some sparks there. Did he add some tubes? Well, maybe there's some gas venting out of there, you know? So the artist helps me define what the initial prep is going to look like, then my initial prep helps the final guys do the polish. So once I had the ship breaking apart into its 3 main pieces, I could say, well, the body doesn't detach from the nose well enough, it looks a little too flush, could you add a little more randomness to, say, break up the silhouette against the light, stuff like that. And then after a few days of revision, I got it back and I'm just keeping on going, and it's just kind of back and forth revisions. So it's usually when I'm not working on one part of the Terrapin because I've either finished it or requested changes, I'm working on another part. I can always jump around. It's not like I'm just doing art or just doing design. I do a lot of checks. I check the shields on the Terrapin, make sure that works, the UV2s on the Terrapin, general functionality like controls, seats, animations, destruction, lighting, you name it. If it's part of the ship, I have to check and make sure it works before I can sign off.
Of course, there's no promises with this. We're still exploring this. We're still building it out, and we won't really know if it works this way or delivers the behaviors that we're hoping for until we actually see it in game. It just gets really exciting when you see something line up the way that, like, you know, I bet we could do something with that. So we'll see how that goes. Among other interesting things about this ship is I got to set up, it sounds dumb, but it makes me really happy that I set up a light switch in the Terrapin that's correctly integrating with our power system and correctly integrates with our light groups to set it from the on to the auxiliary behavior. And it uses the new interaction system, and it's a simple thing, but it makes me so happy to have something so simple in-game and reacting the way that you'd expect it to. When the ship loses power, those lights go off, and that light switch doesn't help. When the ship is in emergency mode, you can turn the lights off, but the emergency lights aren't a part of that system, so they keep going. Everything behaves the way that you'd expect it to, and it's these early examples of systemic wins that really are really nice reminders of why we're building things the way that we are. So that ultimately, it's as simple as make it the way you expect it to be made, and that it behaves the way you expect it to behave. It's just really nice when that happens, when we get to the point where a system begins to exhibit those systemic behaviors.
With that, this month's Ship Shape comes to a close. But don't worry, we're going to be right back here next month with updates on the Aegis Reclaimer and the Tumbril Cyclone. And of course, keep an eye out for the launch of the Aegis Vulcan concept for all backers next week on February 22nd. And of course, the subsequent Q&A post after that. For Ship Shape, I'm Content Manager Jared Huckabee. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Thanks, Jared.
Yes, thank you, Jared. I'd like to say your name a lot. Both of these ships will be nice entry points into very different career types in Star Citizen. The Terrapin is a great ship for aspiring explorers, and the Vulcan is going to be particularly great for players that want to get into supporting other ships in combat and exploration. Remember, the concept sale starts next week, so be sure to check it out.
Jared will be back next month with another Ship Shape, and tune in tomorrow at 8 a.m. PST for another episode of Reverse the Verse Live.
Yeah, will Jared be on that one too?
He will be.
He will be. So this week's guest is lead systems designer Dan Truffen. He'll answer questions about AI and, naturally, gameplay systems. So you won't want to miss that.
And you can get even more Q&A with Jared and developers from all of our studios on Calling All Devs, airing every Monday.
Yes, Jared's on that one too, isn't
he? He is, yeah.
You can check out this week's episode now, as well as the most recent Bug Smashers, which aired yesterday, which I actually don't think has Jared on.
No, he's not. Thanks, as always, to our subscribers for sponsoring these and all of our shows.
And of course, thank you to all our backers for continuing to make the development of all our games possible. We couldn't do any of this without you.
That's right, and that's all for today. Until next week, we will see you
around
the verse.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.